Can you speak louder?
Oh, sure. Thank you for coming out. It's a cold, rainy night, but you came out anyway, and I appreciate that. I really want to thank AARP for doing this and the Greater Bridgeport Latino Network. I just said to them, they're one of the few organizations who's really doing anything to make people aware of what's going on. I want to say to you that I love being a senator. I think that everything that I've learned in my life has brought me to this place. Is it on?
You got it.
Everything that I've learned in my life has brought me to this place. I spent almost 20 years in a telephone company, rising from the lowest paying job to being a district manager. I launched their long distance company, and I launched their cellular company. When I left there, I became interested in women's health, started a nonprofit to help women who are going through breast cancer, and to help women who didn't have health insurance get mammograms. So I have experience in both the nonprofit world and in the corporate world, but I have a lot of experience from just being in Bridgeport and watching people grow, seeing what the needs are, and being able to balance what's going on here. In my first term, chairing human services made me aware of how many people in Connecticut are in need of state services. The human service budget is 60% of the overall budget for the state. And when we meet people in public hearings and committees, it's heartbreaking what people are going through. And I've worked very hard with many organizations to try and hold on to services so they're not being cut, or if they have to be cut at a minimum. I'm also very interested in raising the minimum wage and a fair wage for people who are working in companies where the state of Connecticut is subsidizing services such as their health care, child care, and SNAP benefits. It has been my journey to be honest and truthful and to do the work of the people and to be the lobbyist for the people who don't have a lobbyist in Hartford. And I look forward to serving you for another 2 years. Thank you.
A solution that will impact both Trumbull and Bridgeport residents. What do you think is the best approach for correcting school funding inequity, and are you willing to champion this cause? And this is a GBLN question.
And I just want to say that when I first got elected, one of the main things that I wrote was about the education formula, and I didn't even know what the education formula was. I had just heard how unfair it was. I'm pleased that the judge has said that you have to do something about it. What I'm doing locally, and we just started doing this week, we're meeting with the Board of Education and meeting with the legislators and the city officials, just locally, to figure out what we can do. So we will be prepared in January to go back and figure out how to best serve. This inequity in education will hurt us all down the line. If we're not educating our children fairly and equitably, we will not have the next generation of people prepared to do the jobs that we need to have them do in the future. So I totally support that, and I'm looking forward to working not only with my legislators in Bridgeport, but across the board and across the aisle to figure out what is the best way to make sure that everyone has an equitable, good education that they can use to carry them into the future and sustain their families. It's what I received, and I think everybody has a right to that education.
Thank you. Elaine, do you need a repeated question? What do you think is the best approach for correcting school funding inequity?
I think school funding is probably one of the most major issues the General Assembly has to face. There's no question that a good education is the only path to success. I'll tell you a little story. I have a grandmother, came to this country. She couldn't read or write. She signed her name with an X. She gave birth to 16 children. She buried 8 of them before they were 5 years old. Of the remaining 8, only one, my father, actually finished high school. In that group, they had 16 children. All but 4 of us went to college or a professional school, became nurses. One is a judge in New York City. 2 of us have graduate degrees. The only path to success is through a good education. And it may not be college, it could be a skill program. We shortchange our technical schools all the time. We keep cutting them back, and that's not what we should do. We should be doubling those. We just try to keep, we are keeping Sikorsky they're going to need skilled workers. So I think we have to be sure we're funding all our schools. As far as the formula, when I was a state rep 16 years ago, I was screaming that Bridgeport does not get its fair share. I now actually understand how the formula is calculated, and the formula itself is not bad. It's just the formula told the General Assembly that we needed to give out $2.55 billion, and they gave out 1.9. It's a little bit of a shortfall there. You're going to have to bite the bullet, and some of the towns are going to lose some money. But you know what? I'm betting some of those towns won't care if you take away some of the mandates. If you don't make them do things that cost them money, and you let them run their school system, they can do it smarter and they can do it with less money. So we do need to be fair, and we need to be sure every child in our cities is getting a good education, because we do know from a lot of tests the children in our suburbs are doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elaine, for the third question. Has to do with workplace flexibility from AARP. Would you support laws that provide for family leave or other workplace flexibilities to employees who have to take time off for family caregiving purposes? What proposals would you champion to help family caregivers who are balancing a career and family obligations?
I think that's a tough question and it's a tough answer. I think there are those who want to say, well, we should mandate family leave. But I run a small business. And if you have an office that has 8 or 10 people and someone is out for an extended period of time, you do everything you can, but I'm not sure that they can go on indefinitely. When you have a large corporation, they have other employees that can step in. I mean, we've had this similar problem actually this week. We only have 4 technologists on. One is on vacation. One's father's in the hospital. We're doing everything we can to accommodate it, and we will as long as we have to. Some companies can't be that flexible. So if they're providing you a service and you're expecting that person at your home, how do they survive? I think it's tough. I think that while we need family leave, we cannot ask employers to keep paying for everything. They're small. They have a small profit margin. You're going to hurt them. I think larger corporations, we have the Family Medical Leave Act, but I think it is really tough. I don't know how you can champion it unless you provide people with a backup, and most employers don't have that. So while I know the answer that a lot of people want to hear is we'll do everything, I'll champion a law, I'll force the employers to do it, well, keep making it difficult for people to run a business in this state, and they won't be employing anybody. So you need to balance it. You need to balance the needs of the employee with the needs of the employer, and there's no easy solution to that. It's particularly hard on young mothers whose children get sick. They get a call from the daycare center, you gotta go get your kid. Okay, that's fine. Now tell me how the business is gonna keep running. I mean, obviously you gotta go get your kid. That's the most important thing. You're gonna go do it. But there are 2 sides. There's no simple answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn, same question. What proposals would you champion to help family caregivers who are balancing a career and family?
So I've already endorsed this and signed on to this paper. And it's not going to cost the employer any money the way it's proposed at this time, and it would not impact small employers. What it would do, would have every person pay into a system. And after 2 years, I think we're looking at 2 years to the future, there would be this money that's put into a system to pay the people, so it wouldn't be coming out of the employer's finances. The other piece is that I always think about the mothers and the families that need to take time. I'm not always agreeable that they should be put second, because when you have workers who have the flexibility of taking care of their parents or taking care of someone who's ill, they will do a better job for you when they're on the job versus taking a little bit of time here, taking a little bit of time here, and not really focused on the job at hand. The way we've set up and I've been working with the Working Families Party on this, there are 5 states currently who are implementing the law, and they're implementing it in tiers. And I think that we should at least give it a try and find out how it would work and what are the drawbacks on it. But I do believe that it's an important
question, Marilyn, is actually from the audience. And by the way, it's not too late to submit questions. If you come up with something, write it on a card and somebody will come around and collect it. Right. So the question from the audience is, do you support fully funding pilot? How much more would Bridgeport receive?
I think that we should be, fully funding anything that we legislate. I mean, I'm in Hartford and I see many people come up with all these programs, and then there's the unfunded mandates, but then there's things that we really need to pull off. For the pilot formula, I think that it should, it should coincide with what's fair for other cities. I don't have a dollar amount that I would say, but I think we should fund it 100%.
Okay, Elaine, some questions for you.
I think we need to get to the point where we fund a lot more of the pilot than we do. Whether we can ever get to 100%, and for anyone who doesn't understand, pilot payment in lieu of taxes, you have a tax exempt structure in your town. Therefore, they don't get to pay taxes and you lose it. In the case of Bridgeport, you have hospitals. They don't pay taxes. You have churches that don't pay taxes. In Trumbull, we have a new medical arts building. Great. We now have Yale New Haven Services in Trumbull. And they don't pay taxes either because they're tax exempt. It's just how the rule goes. Now, we need to be fair because the burden falls into the cities, and we need to increase the percentage of the pilot. One of the interesting things I noticed is they play with the formulas all the time. So someone will have to explain to me how the third largest city in our state, which is Hartford, got $67.9 million more than Bridgeport from the state. I don't get it. And I'm not sure anybody up there can give me a clear explanation. My silly logic says the largest city ought to be getting the most. Apparently, there are not enough people in Hartford that think that way. Or the Hartford delegation walks in with a lot stronger block, and they seem to get everything they want. At least they did when I was there 16 years ago. So I don't know, they must still be doing it, given when I look at the numbers, I don't see a big difference. I think it is not fair to ask the cities to shoulder the whole burden of pilot. We should be helping them more than we are. Thank you.
Okay, and Elaine, the next question is from the Latino Network. Given the continuing structural budget issues the state, and by extension towns and cities face, the push to encourage regional collaboration is intensified. Coordinating and sharing resources to promote efficient and effective public services can help reduce costs, while integrating economic development and transportation planning can increase the economic competitiveness of the greater Bridgeport area. What action would you take and/or support as a state senator to require and/or promote regional collaboration?
Well, I think some regional collaboration is good. Some of it we do already. I think there's some things towns will be a little uncomfortable giving up. What a lot of people don't realize right now is a lot of our EMS dispatch and fire dispatch is becoming centralized. Recently, Trumbull renovated its police department and its dispatch center, and it is actually set up so that it can dispatch for other towns if they choose to start combining the service. So we do have some things we collaborate with. Some things we collaborate with, it didn't work. For a little while, Trumbull had a health district with Monroe. Didn't go so well. We ended up disbanding it. But I don't think that should discourage us from looking for other areas. I've heard some people say, well, we should regionalize things like education. We do some of that. We have an agri-science school where we bring children from other towns to our schools. The city has a number of magnet schools that attract children, but an overall combination, that would be, I don't know, probably very difficult to do. But there are areas we can regionalize. We certainly have regionalized in our sewer systems, and that can be regionalized even on a larger area. I would be willing to look at it, but what I am not willing to do is look back at other states and go back to a county form of government, because that just adds another layer of tax and I'm not sure that it does anybody any good. So I think it depends on the service. I think there is synergy. I think one thing people in Bridgeport should understand very clearly is the people in the towns around you very much want things to go well for you and succeed. We worked very closely when we first started talking about Steel Point. The legislatures from all the surrounding towns met once a month in Bridgeport to help get that off the ground. And we walked in unified to Hartford looking for help. Thank you.
Thanks. And Marilyn, what actions would you take to promote regional collaboration?
Well, the action actually is getting the selectmen and the mayors of those different towns together to sit down and have a conversation to identify what weaknesses they have in some of the suburban towns that some of the larger cities can support. Last week I sat with someone from Monroe who told me they have a volunteer fire, EMS, and they're on call. So then they have to call someplace else to get the services, and someone waited 90 minutes to get a service. There's some common sense here that there's some services that large cities like Bridgeport and Trumbull can provide to some rural towns and should be providing. We started with the water and the sewage. I think we should continue on. I don't think 169 towns can continue to move forward and not be able to regionalize and use some of the services that we have. In Bridgeport, we have two major hospitals, Bridgeport and St. Vincent's. And for the most part, the people from Trumbull, Monroe, and surrounding towns come to Bridgeport for their services. What is that? That's regionalism. You're using a service because you don't have it in your own town. And I would encourage more of that for some of the services that we can provide. In the way of education, we do have a multi-district school, and it is working. And I think as schools become more creative and offer more services and more classes, I just was at Longfellow, and they've got a kiln where they're going to have pottery. Every child would like to have that. And I think the mixing of the children for culture, for experiences would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. And the question for you now is, today over 600,000 residents in our state don't have a way to save for retirement at work. Knowing that employees are 15 times more likely to save merely by having access to payroll deductions, will you commit to supporting the newly passed Connecticut Retirement Security Act that will provide these workers with access to private payroll deduction IRA accounts?
I don't think I need 15 minutes or 2 minutes for that. I totally agree that we need to have that system in place, and I need to support it. You know, I have grown children, and when I talk to them about their savings, they don't have the jobs that I had where I stayed one place for 20 years and built up a pension. They're saving a little bit here, a little bit here, and I think that if we want our children to stay here, we have to provide those type of services. But also for some of the seniors that are still working, there are people in their 70s still working. I met a lady, 83 years old, who's doing security because she doesn't have she doesn't have enough money left in her pension. So I would totally support that.
Thank you. Elaine?
I will partially support that, but my problem is I think people need to have payroll deduction, but I don't like to see the state setting up a business that competes with IRAs that are offered by the banks and the brokerage houses we already have. So we've now set up a state institution to compete with our local businesses. I mean, banks are our local businesses. They're not all the big, bad guys from out of state. We have a lot of small local banks. We have brokerage firms. I think we should make it easy. We could mandate that they're allowed to make the payroll deduction, but just about every company that I know that does payment, direct deposit of your paycheck allows you to direct where you want it to go. You can go to your checking account, you can go to your savings account, you can go to your IRA. So you just merely have to have that mechanism to make the donation or the deduction. But you've just set the state up to compete with every bank and every institution, financial institution in the state. And I didn't think that was our job. People do need to retire. They need to save for retirement, and we know that it's woefully short. I spent 3 years working in a pension company, and I know what people don't do. I run our company's 401k, and I see people
putting in and some people not bothering to put anything into it. We need to do a good job, a better job of educating our kids as to why this savings is important. You know, if you show someone young what happens if you put away $5 a week, but starting at 20, and I know they'll say, I don't have the extra money. Well, how about you don't have that pack of cigarettes, or don't buy that app for your phone. They just need to understand why the most important thing you can do, even as a young person, is save for retirement. But I don't want to see the state stepping in the way of it. But we should facilitate it without running it. Thank you. I can live with tolls. It's not toll booths anymore. We carry easy passes on our dashboard, and they read us. Now, I have a car. I live in a state that doesn't have any tolls. I have an easy pass on that car because every time I leave my state, somebody charges me a toll. I hit New York, I pay a toll. I hit New Jersey, I pay a toll. I hit Massachusetts, I pay a toll. Don't go through Delaware, they nab you twice. Smallest state in the union and they get you twice. So, I'm sorry, I'm paying all these other states. All these trucks are driving through my state and not paying anything. So you put a little easy pass on the window, they put a little reader, it reads it, it charges you. It's not that big a deal. And we get revenue. So yeah, I am for tolls.
Marilyn?
I support the toll. I think if I'm so against putting another tax on individuals who live in the state. And I think one of the alternatives could be tolls. I mean, I've even talked to people about, you know, without getting the gadget that you put on your window, something on the car plate that says you're a Connecticut resident, that you get a certain amount of like a credit for a certain amount of money that you can use the tolls before you're actually being billed on them. I see so many cars and trucks come through the state who are using our roads, who I think should be billed for using our roads. You can't, as Elaine said, you can't go to Massachusetts, New York, or any place else. Now, I would be careful about where I place them. And I've talked to people about putting up in Danbury on the Hartford or Massachusetts border when people are coming in, or maybe even from Rhode Island and someplace in the lower part of the state. But I think we have to think of alternative ways to bring in revenue, additional revenue, without putting the burden on individuals who are already paying high property taxes, already paying a sales tax. And that may be the answer to it. And I think there is a way to do it that's not invasive, that someone doesn't have to carry something.
Thank you. So the next question from the audience.
I'll catch on by the end.
What would you do to help revitalize urban cities like Bridgeport? What is your economic development plan for Bridgeport? What will you fight for in Hartford so Bridgeport gets a fair shake?
You know, I look toward the surrounding cities and I look at all the developments going on, and I don't see it happening in Bridgeport. I've been here my entire life. I was waiting for Steel Point to happen when it was Harbor, something in 1970. I would like to in Bridgeport, for us to actually have someone who's actively going out to bring businesses, small businesses, who sustain the community, who will be here long after the people that we give these tax credits to, who come in for 20 years and at the end, they're gone. I'd like to see us develop more small businesses as a way to sustain the community. Small businesses hire local. They're committed to the community. For the most part, they live here. You know, I'm not interested in bringing a casino to Bridgeport, and I've said that before. I'm interested in small businesses being able to sustain and supporting them. And I think we're doing a great job of that in Hartford right now with many of the programs that we have to support small businesses with grants, loans, and development. And I would continue on to do that.
Elaine, your ideas for economic development?
You know, there's no easy answer to this, but I agree with Marilyn that small businesses are really what we want to attract. We spend a lot of money and we give big tax breaks to big companies, and I'm not sure they generate as much for us in the way of jobs and income in our cities. I've often said that you need to make it easier to run a business in this state, and maybe we go out of our way to make them even easier in the city. And by that I mean, depending on what you do, there are all kinds of permitting processes you have to go through, permits you need, rules and regulations. And the problem is, the average small business is somebody with an idea, something they want to do, but they don't know all the rules. And we run our government such that it's a gotcha. When you screw up, we get you, we fine you. How about you just help them start the business? Give them an easy guide. You know, you've got some retired groups that help people, give them advice, but shouldn't the state be in that business too? Shouldn't they be helping us start our businesses? Just, you know, give me a checklist. I want to start Office X. Okay, you need to do this, 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 and this. Instead, you have to look it up yourself, go on multiple websites, try to read. You ever try to read a bill they pass? Oh my God, they're impossible. And you're supposed to figure out what you're supposed to do before they come and fine you for doing it wrong. Well, just help me in the first place. Because I'm willing to bet that 100% of the people trying to start a small business are willing to follow the rules if they could figure out what they were. So just help them. And maybe you set up enterprise zones and empowerment zones in the city. Hey, we've got special help. This is and the city can't do this. The state has to do it for them. Because here are the people from all the agencies you're going to have to deal with, and this is how you do it. So you have to bring it in. And can we encourage some manufacturing? Yeah, but we have to figure out how to get manufacturing back into the country first. Thank you.
Okay, Elaine, and another audience question. The senator for our community will have to work with Governor Malloy. How will you balance between finding common ground when you agree and standing up to the governor when his policies will hurt our residents?
Actually, most people will say I won't have trouble standing up to the governor, but we have to work together. We need to make things work. And I'll tell you a funny story. When I was state rep, the governor was a Republican, as am I. And we had our first budget, and I voted against it. And I had a whole bunch of people come up to my chair and say, what are you doing? You got a red light on that board. It's supposed to be green. I said, nope. I said, it's the governor's budget. It might be the governor's budget. It's not mine, and it's not for the people of my town. He gave it to me at 5 o'clock. We're voting by 11. I can't read it in time. I read budgets. I actually get numbers. You don't give me time to read it. I don't care who you are. I represent the people, not the governor. So standing up to a governor is not a problem. But you can also learn how to reach across the aisle and work with people, and that's what's necessary. I think that if we can show him how we can do things within the structure we have, I do believe that he does want what's best for the people of the state. We just have a different idea how to get there. So we have to become more persuasive in making him understand just constantly raising taxes is not the answer. There has to be some other way. So I am more than willing to reach out to him, but I am also more than willing to stand up for the people I represent. I represent them. I don't represent my party. I don't represent the governor. So most people who know me will figure out that I can stand up to just about anybody. Thank you.
Thanks. And Marilyn, working with the Governor Malloy and finding common ground.
Well, I have some experience with that. So I'll just give you a situation. In my first year, the governor wanted to fund charter schools. And it's not that I'm against charter schools, but I wanted to see some evidence that charter schools were producing the graduates in the school the way they say they are, and we didn't see the documentation. So when the governor wanted to award, I think it was $21 million to charter schools, I wouldn't sign off on the bill. What I did have to do was come to an agreement that, and I will go along with this because it was going to go through anyway. There was enough votes for him to get it. But I just held the line that I would be one of the Democrats who would not be voting for the bill. I was able to bring $4.5 million back to the city of Bridgeport for the Board of Education. So I had to do a trade-off. It was going to happen no matter what. But what I have been able to do, and that I'm very proud of, is in Trumbull, I represent a majority of Republicans. The other 3 state reps are Republicans. The state senator from Monroe is a Republican. The state rep from Monroe is a Republican. And I have been able to work with all of them, no matter what the issue is. We may have differences on the budget. We may have differences on how we believe about labor. But at the end of the day, we look at each town and figure out what is best and what can I do for them. And when it comes to each town, I separate myself from being from Bridgeport and go to the people in Trumbull and sit down and say, what is it that you need? How can I help you to get done what you need to get done? So it's not just working with the governor, but it's also being the person who can go to the governor, since we're the ranking, we're the majority, to go to the governor and get things for someone who may not have the same access to the governor that the majority party may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And as long as you got the mic in your hand. Another audience question. What is your stance on gun safety in our state?
Well, you know, my pastor is Pastor Anthony Bennett. I go to Mount Mary Baptist Church, and he actually went to Germany and visited with some of the gun makers about doing something that would actually put a fingerprint who has had the gun. And that's the way of control of knowing who has the gun. I don't know how we feel it's okay for our children to be carrying guns or have access to guns in the city, and some in the urban areas. I want to work on some gun control that protects our children. People who want to hunt, I want you to be able to hunt, you know. But I also want to keep our children safe. I want to make sure that our children are not carrying guns to school. And I'm seeing metal detectors being put up in all the schools as a safety measure. We have to do better about educating our children that a life is valuable. But the gun control that I'm concerned about with children is really because these kids don't see a future and they don't value life. And that's where we have to get back to having jobs and education for these children so they know there's something more to life than being out here in the streets. And we talked about open gun control. I am against someone being in a supermarket with a gun on their side and they're not doing security and they're not a policeman. I think it's threatening. I think it is inappropriate, and if it comes up again in the legislation, I will not support it.
Elaine, on gun safety? Yes. What is your stance on gun safety in our state?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think the terminology has been changed to gun safety from gun control. No one is against gun safety. How could anybody be against gun safety? We want all of our children, all of our adults, we want everybody to be safe. We want everybody to be able to live without being in fear. And unfortunately, some of the things that have happened in the last few years make us worry when we send our children off to school every day. And it's a different world. I think there are a couple of points. I think the first one has to do with treating people who have mental health problems, which was an issue when we have something like Sandy Hook. It's no longer the dark ages, it's no longer a stigma. We have it out in the open and we need to treat people. We need to give them the help they need and prevent the tragedies that are happening. I think another source of a lot of our gun violence is drugs. And we have got to get a better handle. We've had a war on drugs for a long time. We're not winning it very well though. And the problem is we cut $8.7 million from mental health and substance abuse in this budget. So we say we want to help people and then we cut the funds. I do agree with Marilyn. These people need hope. They need to know their jobs. They need to know there's an alternative to drugs. And we do that by giving them a good school system and a good education. And lastly, I think we need more police. And it's unfortunate that recently in Bridgeport, the Board of Ed cut SROs, but fortunately the police department is funding them to put them back. Even in Trumbull, we added 3 SROs, even in a suburban school system, because they're there, they talk to the kids, they know what's going on, they prevent it. We have to become more proactive. And you're short over 100 police officers in Bridgeport. That's insane. You start a class, but by the time you finish it, enough people have retired, you can't stay ahead of this game. And I think you need help, and I think the state has a role in that.
Thanks. And yes, next question, also an audience question. What would you do to improve the state's infrastructure without tax increases, and what would you do to force Metro North to keep fare hikes from being implemented without public input?
Well, it's hard to fix the infrastructure without money. So I'm not really sure you can do that without, maybe not so much raising new funds, but how about lock up the funds you currently have? The transportation funds were supposed to stay dedicated to transportation. You pay a tax on your gas, and we're supposed to use that money to fix the roads. You know, it's kind of like the old Social Security was in a lockbox until Lyndon Johnson and his cronies got their handles on it, and they started spending it on everything else. Transportation funds should be held to transportation funds. Same thing if we put in tolls. Those tolls should go directly and only to transportation. And there are ways around, we were talking about it being electronic. If you live in the state, you can pay a different rate than the people who don't. A lot of people don't know in New York, if you live in Staten Island, the only way on and off is the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. So those people pay less money for the toll than the people in the rest of the world. So you can accommodate that, but you have got to lock those funds up so they stay dedicated. And as far as Metro North, I had the disagreeable option of traveling on that for 3 years. And what it cost me to go into New York every day was brutal. They shouldn't be able to have a fare hike without talking to the people who they're supposed to be servicing. But there's a lot more to that because we're connected to the New York Authority, and there are a lot of contracts that are connected to running Metro North that most of us don't really have access to or see. But I don't think anybody should have a fare hike, but they haven't at least had an opportunity to talk about. Talk to the people who are using it and understand what to do. Thank you.
Marilyn, do you need a reread? It's a two-part question, I guess. What would you do to improve the state's infrastructure without tax increases? And what would you do to force Metro North to keep fare hikes from being implemented without public input?
So for the infrastructure, the governor has set aside many billions of dollars for our highways, for our transportation system. And, you know, although I love the idea of a lockbox, I just want to say when we were negotiating the budget and appropriations came up with what they thought we could work with, the first place we went to that people wanted to go to on both sides of the aisle was to the transportation fund, which means that he had to pull back on it. I think we should dedicate the money for what if we're going to make a law, we need to enact the law. If we're going to set aside money for something, I think we should set aside for it. I think there should be circumstances that we're able to come together and agree in the legislature that we are going to have to take some of that money out because things change constantly. For I think there should be, anytime you're doing any type of rate increase, whether it's for utilities or for transportation, that you owe it to the public to have a public hearing to hear how it's going to impact them. But not just have a hearing for the sake of having a hearing, having a hearing and considering the input of the citizens when you make those decisions. So no one's going to say, yes, I want a hike. But I mean, if you started out saying you wanted a 10% hike and you end up having a public hearing where you're hearing people can't handle it, that you come to a figure, what can you work? But I believe the people who use the services have every right to have a public hearing to talk about what they're getting ready to change and how much they're going to change and how it's going to impact your lives.
Thank you. And before I read the last question from AARP, is there anybody else who has a question or thought of anything that they want covered? No? Okay. The last question has kind of a long lead. AARP fights for lower electric bills for our constituents who are very dependent on it. So Dominion Power operates the Millstone Nuclear Power Plant in Eastern Connecticut. It generates electricity for many homes and businesses in Connecticut, as well as a few neighboring states. This plant is licensed until 2035. Pricing for electricity has fallen, and consumption of natural gas has increased. Dominion Power states they may need to shut down the plant because they are now selling energy at a lower price, and it has become unprofitable to keep the plant open. So will you oppose legislation that will require utility customers to subsidize the profitability of merchant generators like Millstone Nuclear Power Plant that show their actual loss in profits?
That's a long way. Just before I came here, I spoke to the Commissioner of Agriculture, and we were talking about solar panels and what's being done in the way of solar panels and how it's driving down the rates. But for those rates, we are losing a lot of our farmland. They're doing acres, 256 acres they bid for, which is going to have an impact on the growth of the food in Connecticut and what we can be able to produce. I think it's not a yes or no. I think we need to look at how much of a profit are they making in the development of the power. How does it impact the future? And if we don't have the power plant, what are the other resources that we have to get the power that we're going to need? I just think there's alternative ways to generating power, and the ways that we used to may not be appropriate for the future.
Okay. Tell me you don't need a rereader.
I wrote it.
Okay, it's actually a very complicated issue, and I was talking to someone from Pura the other day because they were running a program for seniors and their electric bills in Trumbull. When we deregulated electricity, the interesting part is you look at your bill now, and it costs them more to deliver it to you than you pay to generate it. And then if you add all the fees on top of it that the state puts, it adds another third to the bill. So perhaps there's a novel idea. No, I do not want the citizens of this state to subsidize a for-profit company who's already charging me for the electricity. So let's be clear about that piece. But if they can't make money at it because it's not a break even, and we're in a state that is so energy short because we have no natural resources, why would we not think about making it a public entity? You have public water companies. You have towns that have their own water companies. And we have some towns that have their own electric companies. So why would we not consider the option of should the state take over running it as a not-for-profit? Scares me the thought that they might actually be able to run something, but maybe they could. And it certainly should be looked at because I wouldn't want to see it, all that power source gone. But I also don't want to subsidize a company that's making a lot of money. But one of the other things that the Pura people pointed out was as some of us move more and more to solar panels, we are consuming less electricity and generating exactly this problem. So it's sort of a catch-22 because we do want people to get solar power, but there is a limit to that in the state, and we don't want to lose our sources of electricity, so I don't think you want to lose a nuclear power plant. So maybe we look at whether or not we could run it as a not-for-profit.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to go right into our closing comments. And Elaine, you're up first.
I would say that at this point in time, I think Connecticut is a crossroads. You know, we remember the good old days. We went shopping downtown. There were stores. We went down to the Klein for a concert. Schools were good, our kids were safe. We went to work, maybe we worked in a factory. You could provide for a family. Not so much today. Ronald Reagan asked when he was debating Carter, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? I'm not sure how people here would answer that today. We look at a lot of things changing, and we want it to turn around. We want to turn around and we want to make our state great again. And how do we do that? I think we do that by changing the way we operate. We have to look at something other than the status quo. We need to stabilize taxes and spending. You know, people understand that maybe taxes are going to go up, but they can't go jumping all over the place. You need to plan. You plan your house. You plan your family. We have to run a state. Can you imagine, we budget in this state, so imagine for a minute that you're making $50,000 a year, and your boss says to you, you can have a $20,000 budget, a bonus, if everything goes right. So what do? You start living on $70,000. End of year comes, boss says, things didn't go so well. But guess what? You're not getting the $20,000. Uh-oh. What are you going to do? Go borrow the money? We're in a state where we bond money and borrow literally to keep the lights on. So would you use your credit card at 29% interest to keep the lights on? You wouldn't, and we have to stop running the state that way. So we really need to create a better environment. And frankly, we need to change who's in control of this state. So I am asking you please on November 8th to give me your vote. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. I just paid my
Marilyn?
credit card.
So first of all, I want to thank you again for staying. Everybody stayed to the end. I have spent the first term working very hard in the legislature, fighting for what I think the people of both Trumbull, Bridgeport, and Monroe need. I brought back more money in my term than the prior years. Despite the narrative that's been created that Connecticut is falling apart and we're doing bad, CBIA, the Connecticut Business Industry, did a poll of some 335 businesses. And for the most part, more than 53% of those businesses said they were doing good, offering more products, and they plan on staying in Connecticut. We just have to continue on this road that we're on of supporting businesses, supporting a great education system for everyone, doing everything we can to make sure that all children have an education. I've been doing that in my first 2.5 years, but I was doing that long before I went to the Senate. I've been a community advocate for people who didn't have a voice for most of my life, and I have the intentions of going back to Hartford and do the same thing. We make hard decisions every single day when we're up there, and it's a very tough job. And sometimes you have to make decisions that you don't really like, but you have to do what's good for the majority. You have to do what's good for people who don't have a voice. And I have said to people over and over again, the big companies that make a lot of money have lobbyists running me down every single day when I'm in Hartford. But when I'm in Hartford, I'm the lobbyist for the people who elected me to go up there and represent them. And I'm asking you to send me back for another 2 terms to go back and finish the work that I've started in the first term. And I thank you.
Thank you, and let me turn you over to John for some closing remarks.
Thank you. Let's have a round for the candidates. The other volunteers and colleagues from AARP with the shirts, and especially our partnership with the Greater Bridgeport Latino Network and Carolyn Gonzalez. We can get a round for her. And just as I pointed out, I wrote that energy question, and as Senator Moore can tell you, if Ms. Hammers, you have the opportunity to serve, and Senator Moore, if you go back, you can be assured that I'll be hounding you in the Capitol about energy-related issues, my favorite topic, as you know. So, but I do want to just make one